She was shunned by her own kind, until a human told her she was beautiful. Embers in the void. The security system chimed just as Lyra finished calibrating the atmospheric filters. Another fault in the external sensors, probably ice buildup again. She sighed, her breath crystallizing in the perpetually chilled air of the research station. Proximity alert, announced the station's AI in its flat, emotionless voice. Unidentified object entering orbital trajectory. Lyra's eyes, pale violet with concentric rings that shifted like gaseous planets, narrowed. Nothing entered Nephthys 9's orbit without intent. This frozen moon orbiting a gas giant at the edge of charted space wasn't exactly a tourist destination. She crossed to the observation dome, her slender frame moving with a grace that belied the constant discomfort she felt in her own skin. The dome's polymer surface was scored with years of micrometeorite impacts, but the view remained unobstructed. Above, against the perpetual twilight that passed for day on Nephthys 9, a glowing streak cut through the lavender sky. Identity? She asked. Unknown, replied the AI. Small craft. Erratic descent pattern. Calculating crash probability at 87.4%. A crash. Not a visit. Lyra felt an unexpected twist of disappointment. 3 years alone on this frozen rock made even the prospect of unwanted company somehow appealing. Her hand moved involuntarily to touch one of her ears, elongated, translucent at the tips, with a faint luminescence that pulsed with her heartbeat. Not fully cerulean, not fully human. A hybrid that shouldn't exist. The reason she was here. Alone. The object in the sky flared brighter, its trajectory steepening. Definitely a crash now. She could see the ship, barely larger than an escape pod, tumbling as it cut through the thin atmosphere, leaving a trail of superheated particles behind it. Impact in 43 seconds, said the AI. Recommend activation of emergency protocols. Location. Northwestern quadrant. 7 kilometers from station perimeter. Close enough to investigate. Far enough that she wasn't in immediate danger. Prepare the rover, she said, already reaching for her thermal suit. And run a full biohazard scan. I don't need any surprises. The rover, a chunky, 6-wheeled vehicle with reinforced impact plating, handled the frozen terrain with the grace of a drunken banda. It bounced over ice formations and skidded across patches of frozen methane, its heating system struggling against the constant -170°C outside. Lyra guided it over a ridge of black ice and saw the crash site immediately. The vessel had carved a 100-meter gash into the surface, vaporizing ice and sending crystalline debris in all directions. Steam still rose from the trench, rapidly freezing into a fine mist of ice particles that glittered in the dim light. The ship itself was wedged at an angle against a rock formation, its hull blackened but largely intact. Compact, with smooth lines and an unconventional engine configuration, it looked like nothing Lyra had seen before. Detecting a single life sign, said the rover's scanner. Human. Weak but stable. Human. Here, of all places. Lyra hesitated. Her exile was self-imposed, but it was still exile. Contact with others, especially humans, complicated things. The Ceruleans didn't forbid her from interacting with other species, but they made it clear she was better off away from society. Her genetic structure was too unstable, they said. Her resonance patterns unpredictable. Dangerous, High Harmonist Ravel had called her during her final evaluation. A discordance in the symphony of life. But she couldn't leave someone to die. Not even if it meant risking exposure. Lyra disembarked, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. The cold bit through her thermal suit immediately, a hungry predator seeking her warmth. She had minutes, at most, before exposure would become dangerous. The ship's hatch was partially open, bent outward as if something had kicked it from within. Emergency lights flickered inside, casting oscillating red shadows across the ice field. Hello? she called out, her voice sounding thin in the sparse atmosphere. "Can you hear me?" A groan emanated from inside. Then a figure appeared at the hatch, a human man, disheveled, with a gash across his forehead that leaked crimson onto his face. He squinted at her, swaying slightly. "Either I've died," he said, voice hoarse, "or you're the strangest hallucination I've ever had." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed forward. Lyra lunged, catching him before his head hit the ground. Up close, she could see he wore the uniform of an independent cargo hauler, though without any company insignia. His skin was warm against hers, too warm, fever-bright. "You're not dead," she told his unconscious form. "Not yet, anyway." Getting him into the rover was a struggle. He was lean but solid, and utterly useless in his unconscious state. By the time she had him secured in the passenger seat, her extremities were beginning to numb from cold. During the return journey, she kept glancing at him. Human, yes, but with features that suggested mixed heritage, slightly angular eyes, warm bronze skin, dark hair cropped close on the sides but longer on top. A scar ran along his jawline, old and faded. Perhaps 40 standard years old, though humans aged unpredictably. He stirred as they approached the station, mumbling something unintelligible before his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he stared at her uncomprehendingly. Then his gaze sharpened. "You're real," he said, voice scratchy. "And unusual." Lyra kept her eyes on the terrain ahead. "I'm real. And you crashed on my moon." "Your moon?" He attempted to sit up straighter, wincing. "Didn't realize Nephthys 9 was privately owned." "It's not. But I'm the only one here, so possession is 9/10 of interstellar law." She guided the rover into the station's vehicle bay, the doors sealing behind them with a pneumatic hiss. "Who are you, and why were you flying a junker ship without proper navigation systems?" He managed a crooked smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, less weathered. "Theo Mercer. Independent surveyor. And my NAV systems were fine until I hit that radiation belt your moon neglected to advertise." "The belt is well documented," Lyra said, powering down the rover. "If you had proper charts." "If I had proper charts," he agreed, "I wouldn't be having this delightful conversation with." He raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Lyra," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Lyra Nevin." She hadn't spoken her name aloud to another person in over 3 years. It felt strange in her mouth, like a word from a forgotten language. "Well, Lyra Nevin," Theo said, "I appear to be in your debt." And slightly concussed. The medical bay was small but adequate, another remnant of the station's former life as a research outpost. Lyra helped Theo onto the examination table, trying to ignore how he stared at her ears, her eyes, the faint luminescence that pulsed beneath her skin when her heart rate increased. "You're not fully human," he observed as she cleaned the gash on his forehead. "No," she agreed, applying a regenerative gel to the wound. "I'm not." "Cerulean," he guessed. "I've seen them before. Though you're different," she finished for him. "Yes, I know. Half human, half cerulean. A genetic anomaly. Uncommon and unstable." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Theo studied her face. "I was going to say beautiful." Lyra's hands froze. The gel applicator slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Around them, the lights in the medical bay flickered, dimming momentarily before brightening again. "Don't," she said softly, bending to retrieve the applicator. "Don't say things you don't mean. Why would I bother lying to someone who just saved my life?" Theo asked, genuinely puzzled. He reached up, hesitating before his fingers could touch one of her ears. "These are extraordinary. The way they catch the light, it's like looking at opals underwater." The station's systems flickered again, more pronouncedly this time. A warning message flashed on the medical bay's monitor, energy fluctuation detected. Lyra stepped back, her breath quickening. It was happening again, the resonance disruption the Cerealians had warned about. Her emotional state affecting electronic systems, creating quantum instabilities. The reason they'd suggested, firmly, that isolation would be best for everyone. Don't. Please don't say things like that, she repeated, struggling to control her breathing. It creates complications. Theo glanced at the flickering lights, then back at her. Understanding dawned on his face. You're affecting the systems, he said. Emotional response coupled with bioelectric discharge. I've heard theories about Cerealian human hybrids, but I thought they were just speculation. We're rare, Lyra admitted, feeling the energy gradually stabilize as she regained control. And not particularly welcome in either society. So you hide on a frozen moon at the edge of nowhere. It wasn't a question. Alone. It's safer. For everyone. She finished treating his wound in silence, then stepped back. You should rest. Your ship needs extensive repairs before it'll fly again. Theo caught her wrist gently as she turned to leave. His touch was warm, solid, the first physical contact she'd had with another being in years. It sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. Thank you, he said simply. For saving me. She nodded stiffly. Rest. We'll figure out your ship tomorrow. Later, as Lyra checked the station's systems, she found herself distracted by thoughts of her unexpected guest. His presence disturbed the careful isolation she'd built around herself, threatened the control she'd struggled to maintain. But when he'd called her beautiful, not with pity or scientific curiosity, but with genuine appreciation, something had awakened inside her. A resonance, like a tuning fork struck after years of silence. Outside, Nephthys Nine's eternal twilight cast long shadows across the frozen landscape. In the distance, where Theo's ship had crashed, the ice glowed with an unusual luminescence, not from the crash itself, but something deeper, something awakening beneath the surface. Something that, like Lyra herself, had been waiting. Symphony of Light. Theo recovered quickly over the next 3 days, his human resilience surprising Lyra. He spent hours examining her station's equipment with the practiced eye of someone who had worked with technology far older than her retrofitted research base. These sensor arrays are military grade, he observed on the 4th morning, leaning over a console in the main control room. Not standard issue for a civilian research station. Lyra handed him a steaming cup of synthetic caffeine that the station's fabricator produced, a poor imitation of coffee, but the best available. This wasn't always a civilian operation. I figured, Theo said, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. What were they studying out here that required this level of security? Before she could answer, the station's alert system chimed. Lyra moved to the main console, her shoulders tensing as she read the display. Cerealian vessel entering the system, she said, voice tight. Long-range cruiser. Diplomatic classification. Theo came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Friends of yours? No. She studied the approaching ship's signature. The Cerealians don't waste diplomatic vessels on social calls. They're here for something specific. You. She glanced at him, then back at the screen. Possibly. Or perhaps they detected your crash. Either way, it complicates things. Do they know about? He gestured vaguely at her, at the luminescence that pulsed beneath her skin whenever her emotions ran high. My heritage? Yes. My abilities? Not fully. Lyra straightened, decision made. There's something I need to show you before they arrive. Something I found 3 months ago. They took the rover deep into Nephthys Nine's northern quadrant, past jagged ice formations that looked like the skeletal remains of ancient beasts. Lyra drove with silent intensity, eyes fixed on the horizon where twin moons hung like watchful eyes in the lavender sky. When I first came here, she said finally, breaking the silence, I chose this moon because it was remote. Uninhabited. Safe. She navigated around a deep crevasse. What I didn't know was that it had been chosen long before, by something ancient. What kind of something? Theo asked. I'm still not sure. But it responds to me. She stopped the rover at the edge of what appeared to be a perfect circle carved into the ice, 200 meters in diameter. At its center, a faint luminescence pulsed with the same rhythm as the light beneath Lyra's skin. To this, they disembarked, the brutal cold immediately assaulting them through their thermal suits. Lyra led Theo toward the circle's center, their boots crunching on the crystallized surface. Watch, she said, removing her glove. She knelt and placed her bare palm against the ice. Immediately, light bloomed outward from her hand, not the frozen moon's surface cracking, but something beneath it awakening. The luminescence spread in geometric patterns, lines and curves forming symbols unlike any human or Cerealian script. The ice began to shift, not melting but reconfiguring, molecules rearranging themselves. A pathway formed leading to a descending staircase that hadn't existed moments before. Molecular manipulation, Theo whispered, awestruck. Response to specific bioelectric signatures. This technology it shouldn't exist. And yet it does, Lyra said, standing. And it responds only to me. They descended the staircase, which spiraled gently into the moon's interior. The walls around them glowed with the same soft luminescence, providing light and, remarkably, warmth. As they moved deeper, the cold of the surface receded. I've explored only the upper chambers, Lyra explained as they reached a vast, domed room. Every time I come, more reveals itself. It's as if it's teaching me. Or waiting for me to understand something. The chamber was breathtaking, a perfect hemisphere with walls that seemed composed of living crystal. They pulsed with light that moved in waves, responding to Lyra's presence. At the room's center stood a column of pure energy, swirling in hypnotic patterns. It's beautiful, Theo said, voice hushed. His eyes reflected the dancing lights, making them seem deeper, fathomless. What is it? I think it's a beacon, Lyra replied. Or perhaps a key. I've tried to decipher the symbols, but they shift each time The ground beneath them trembled. Above, through the crystal ceiling now somehow transparent, they could see a Cerealian shuttle descending toward the surface. They found us faster than I expected, Lyra said, tension evident in her voice. The chamber responded to her anxiety, the light patterns accelerating, colors shifting toward urgent crimson and amber hues. The column of energy at the center began to rotate more rapidly. They're tracking your energy signature, Theo realized. Your connection to this place is creating a beacon they can follow. Lyra nodded grimly. We should return to the surface. Confrontation in here could be unpredictable. They ascended quickly, emerging onto the surface just as the Cerealian shuttle touched down 50 meters away. Its sleek, crystalline hull reflected the moon's dim light, making it appear as though a shard of living glass had embedded itself in the ice. The shuttle's hatch opened with silent precision. 3 figures emerged, tall, willowy beings with luminescent skin and elongated features that appeared almost painfully perfect. Unlike Lyra, their ears were shorter, more delicate, and their eyes were solid colors without pupils, giving them an otherworldly, emotionless appearance. The leader stepped forward, moving with liquid grace. Lyra Nevin, he said, voice melodic yet somehow sterile. You have violated the terms of your separation agreement by making contact with unauthorized species and by activating precursor technology. I didn't activate anything deliberately, Harmonist Jovan, Lyra replied, recognizing the Cerealian official who had overseen her departure years ago. It responded to me. Precisely the problem. Jovan's gaze shifted to Theo, dismissive. The human will be returned to the nearest outpost. You will accompany us to Cherelia for evaluation. Evaluation, Lyra repeated, the word bitter in her mouth. You mean containment. Your genetic instability has progressed, Jovan said, gesturing toward the now visible pulsing beneath her skin. The council was correct in their assessment of your condition. My condition, Lyra said, a new firmness in her voice, is not what you think it is. She turned to look at the entrance to the underground chamber, which remained open, light spilling from it like liquid starlight. I'm not broken, Jovan. I'm evolved. The ground beneath them trembled again, but this time not from the Cerulean ship. The entire circle began to glow, energy patterns spreading outward like ripples in water. Jovan and his companions stepped back, alarm evident in their usually impassive faces. What have you done? Jovan demanded. Nothing, Theo interjected, moving to stand beside Lyra. She hasn't done anything except be exactly who she was meant to be. The energy column from the chamber below rose through the opening, expanding as it reached the surface. It enveloped Lyra in a cocoon of light, lifting her several inches off the ground. The luminescence beneath her skin intensified until she glowed like a newborn star. Instead of fear, Lyra felt clarity. Understanding flooded her consciousness, not in words but in pure knowledge, as if information was being written directly into her cellular structure. The precursors, the ancient race that had built the chamber, had seeded worlds across the galaxy with genetic markers, evolutionary catalysts designed to awaken when the time was right. The Ceruleans, she said, her voice resonating with power that wasn't entirely her own, were never meant to remain static. Evolution is not a flaw to be corrected, but a path to be followed. Images flashed through her mind, other chambers, other worlds, other beings with genetic markers different from but related to her own. A network spanning galaxies, dormant for millennia, waiting for the right combinations to awaken it. Your isolation policy, she told Jovan, has prevented natural evolution. The hybridization you feared is exactly what was intended. The energy around her pulsed, and with it, every piece of technology in the vicinity, the rover, the Cerulean shuttle, even the implants in Jovan's ceremonial staff, responded, systems aligning to a new frequency. Impossible, whispered one of Jovan's companions. She's rewriting quantum-locked protocols. But Lyra wasn't attacking or controlling, she was harmonizing, bringing disparate systems into a new kind of synchronization. The chamber below had taught her how to be a conduit, not a weapon. Gradually, the light receded, settling into a gentle aura around her. Lyra's feet touched the ground again, but she stood differently now, confident, balanced, no longer at war with her own nature. I am Vanera, she said, using a term from the chamber's knowledge that had no direct translation but meant something like, bridge between. I am neither broken nor dangerous. I am necessary. Jovan stared at her, his ancient eyes reflecting confusion and, surprisingly, the first glimmers of understanding. The council must be informed, he said finally. Yes, Lyra agreed. But not to contain me or study me. To prepare. There are others like me throughout known space, hybrids, variants, those you've dismissed as flawed. The chambers are awakening. Evolution continues whether you acknowledge it or not. Theo moved cautiously to her side. You okay? He asked quietly. She turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time, not just his physical form, but the patterns of energy that composed him, the unique signature of his being. I'm more than okay, she said. I'm complete. The Ceruleans retreated to their shuttle, unsure how to proceed in the face of something that defied their understanding of natural law. They would return to their homeworld, Lyra knew, but not as conquerors or jailers, as messengers. As the shuttle lifted off, disappearing into the lavender sky, Theo turned to her. So, what happens now? Lyra smiled, feeling the chamber's energy pulsing beneath the surface, waiting. Now we find the others. The network is awakening, Theo. Chambers like this one exist throughout the galaxy, and people like me, bridges between species, between past and future, are the keys. Sounds like an adventure, he said, returning her smile. It won't be easy, she warned. The Ceruleans aren't the only ones who fear change. Many will resist. Good thing you've got a somewhat competent pilot with a recently crashed ship that needs a new purpose, then. Lyra laughed, the sound clear and bright in the frozen air. For the first time in her life, the luminescence beneath her skin didn't flicker with uncertainty, it glowed with steady purpose. Above them, stars began to appear as Nephthys 9's brief day cycle ended, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere among them, others like Lyra were waiting, unaware of their purpose or potential. First, she said, turning toward the still open chamber entrance, we need to understand what we're dealing with. The chamber contains star maps, coordinates, a guide to finding the others. Theo nodded, his expression becoming serious. Lead the way, Vanera. As they descended once more into the ancient chamber, Lyra felt a resonance building, not just within herself, but across vast distances, like the first notes of a symphony beginning to play after eons of silence. She had been alone, isolated by her difference. Now she understood that difference wasn't her weakness, it was her greatest strength. Not a flaw, but a feature deliberately designed into the fabric of her being. And somewhere in the space between stars, others were waiting to discover the same truth.